Hi Dennis. Hi Mandy. Okay, so Dennis, how did you come across the story of the orphanage?
We been contacted by volunteers in Ukraine who really work in the war zone in the east of Ukraine. And the reason why we're so concerned about this particular orphanage is because, unlike many other ones, there are about 47 of them, that particular orphanage had received 230 extra children. They used to have 200 mainly girls, and then they got 230 mainly boys from the part of Ukraine which is occupied by the rebels and the Russians. And the reason why they were so worried about the orphanage was because there was no medical input, really, and about 100 of the 430 children were on neuroleptic medication, on antipsychotics of different kinds, and they needed to be reviewed by a child psychiatrist. And did you want to say why you came in?
I guess I think it's kind of important to have someone to back ideas off, but also just in terms of the nursing practice or the organisation of the orphanage, just like having a think about the systems that are in place about looking after the children. That was the main kind of reasons. But I thought also because I think it's good to have some support, because I think we thought that it's going to be obviously quite upsetting and an emotional time, so I think it's good to kind of have someone with you to kind of be thinking how to manage.
How long was the duration of your visit?
3 days.
When you first arrived at the orphanage, what was the first thought that crossed your mind?
That's a CBT question. So what went through our mind when we first came to the orphanage?
What this question is meant to ask about, maybe your first impact, something that really captured your attention.
Well, my first thought was, it isn't as bad as I thought it would be.
For me, I think the very first, because when we first pulled up in the minibus, there was a lot of young boys or teenage boys that came to the van, and I guess my first thought is actually there's a risk of them pinching our stuff. That's what I thought at the beginning, because they were actually really interested in what we brought. So it was a very deprived feeling about what have you got for us, what have you got for us. And I think,
can you show us your iPhone?
Can you show me your iPad? And it started to feel like you had to lock away your phones. So that was the very first, before we went inside. It was kind of a little bit intimidating, I think, at that point. A bit different from you.
What kind of work did you do there?
Essentially, we reviewed the children on antipsychotics, had some understanding of what sort of psychological work was done with them, and then Mandy had some thoughts about how to organize the environment and how to organize some policies, for example, like infection control, staffing ratio, and things of this sort.
Because what we found out when we were there is that the volunteers first kind of were brought their attention of the orphanage because they had an infection control issue, had an outbreak of sickness and diarrhoea, which they were finding some difficulties in managing just because of the resources. So that was something that we kind of had a look at.
How was the cooperation with the staff of the orphanage?
What do you think? I thought it was an interesting combination of quite, some openness and some willingness to collaborate, paired with perhaps understandable worry about us perhaps exposing what they thought was problematic practice.
Yeah, I think in fact we met a lot of really passionate people that wanted to be doing their very best with children. I think the difficulty is that there probably was a feeling that they probably weren't or couldn't possibly with that amount of children. So I think that there was a little flavour of defensiveness, but I think that was appropriate in that they kind of were worried that they weren't quite doing their best, but trying to do their best, because they lacked kind of resources.
And yeah, I mean, I think some of the, I mean, really, we had to, the first thing we had to do was to tell them that we absolutely will not either expose what they, what they thought we might find to be sort of wanting practice, or criticize unreservedly or inappropriately their practice. And because really what was very striking was that these nurses were doing an extraordinary work under the most difficult of the circumstances, and we wanted to sort of position ourselves as people that they could bounce ideas with and use our experience, as opposed to some sort of critical or invading force.
Because some of their practice wasn't out of malice, but it was just about them needing to be educated about appropriate treatment. So, and in addition to that, there was just like such a large quantity of children. So, you can imagine with varying problems, so from physical disabilities to psychiatric problems to no problems at all, but children have lost their parents. So it's managing the mixture of those children and the varied age range, so all the way from 4 all the way up to 18 within one setting. It's a mammoth task. I can't imagine that anybody would be able to really do that successfully.
Dennis, you said an additional 230 children were transferred to the orphanage. How do you think this affected the environment of the children that were originally there?
I think Mandy would be in a better position to know as well.
I think it was a real upheaval for both the children and for the staff, because I think that they felt that there was little choice really, because there was a change in the climate, in that obviously they got into the situation where the war had increased, and they were they had to place the children there. And I think when they first arrived, they didn't have beds and stuff for them. So I think it would have been a real upheaval for the other children, because they would have overcrowded all of a sudden, increase in people, a lot of stress for the staff. I think by the time we arrived, they'd managed to get beds for every child, and I think things were a lot more settled, if you like. But I think in the first couple of days it must have been one, upsetting for the children, but I think it really a challenge for the staff. How are they going to manage with all these children? Additional food, so very basic requirements, food and warmth and bedding was kind of really going to be a challenge for them.
From all cases that you have witnessed, were there one in particular that you found interesting, learned from, and would want to share with us?
Well, we've seen quite a few children. And perhaps the most memorable boy in my mind was the one who wanted to run away.
Same,
Did you think about this?
The same child, yeah.
So
it was his birthday, wasn't it?
his birthday as well. And it's a problem with all children in care, where a certain percentage of them would want to run away. And sometimes they do it for reasons like abuse or bullying, which we didn't think was the case with that particular boy. And sometimes they do it for some other complex reasons. Boredom could be part of this, but maybe some of them could be much more complex than that. And the boy we saw was really very keen to run back to his original orphanage, which unfortunately involved crossing the wall, the front line of the wall. And in addition to that, he ran the wrong way. So instead of running to his back, or perhaps for the better, he ran the opposite way. So he ran away from his original orphanage. But the reason why nurses were so concerned about this was because he didn't like to run away by himself. He liked other boys to come with him. And the boy really took a lot of interest in telling us the story and how they were running away, how they managed to hide in the bushes, and how the police couldn't find them for a while, and then they found them, and how how they got back to the orphanage and so on. Really, with that boy, in terms of the learning point, was that really, I think it just highlights how important it is to have a full and comprehensive work outlined for these children, where they would feel interested in doing things in the orphanage, and perhaps think less about other things that may be perhaps more exciting, but a lot more dangerous. And the little boy told us that he wasn't going to run away anymore because, but after the war he might.
I think for me there's two children. I think it's difficult for me to, because we visited two orphanages. We visited one with really small children before we visited the one in the war zone. So I think for me there was a little girl there, and I think that was really positive because that orphanage wasn't overpopulated, and it's quite specific. And the girl hadn't been able to walk, and she'd learnt to walk while she'd been there. She was there with her mum, so it was a very different experience. But you could see that she'd previously been in the orphanage, and she just lacked some emotion in her face. So there's her. She's very little. She was only probably about 2 or 3. And she was kind of like following us around, kind of like gazing into our eyes, but with a really kind of blank expression. So there's her, and then probably from the war zone the same boy as you. And I think what he represented as well, because I think they were asking questions around whether he should be medicated because they were so worried about him running away. And to us, it sort of epitomised the mixture of the group, because actually there wasn't really a lot wrong with him. So, and part of me was thinking, well, I'll probably be trying to run away as well, kind of that healthy bit of me wanted. We joked about it, didn't we, really, saying, would you be okay, is that a healthy thing that he's running away, not necessarily an anxiety. He's still got that in him, that he wants to be integrated into the outside world of Ukraine, if you like. But some of the children weren't like that. They were completely going to grow up in the orphanage, but he still had that hope to kind of, if you like, be with a family or be with his. So that's why he kind of, sticks out really.
In which manner do you consider the European community to be of assistance in allocating resources to the children of this orphanage?
So, we think that there are certain things that need to happen fairly rapidly, in particular the review of the rather old antipsychotic medication and change, but also things like an ECG machine that would be required, and some other things. So we hope that the European community, which at this moment at least includes the UK community too, might help with getting some of these things in place. Having said this, I think that the resources that the volunteers and the government also give to the orphanage are not desperately out of touch. It's a matter of perhaps prioritizing and getting the right things for the orphanage. But if we could help from here, it'd be nice. I think Mandy managed to. How many pairs of socks did you get?
About 700 pairs of socks we do in about 3 or 4 days. So it's kind of. I think people are really interested, because I think people can see that that here we're privileged, and at the moment the country is in some crisis and does need some support. So I think people will, and we've already had someone email today saying, do you need toys, or and also another department saying, should we fundraise some money? So I think people are interested.
Yeah. We hope that there will be a follow after this.
And on a personal level, what has this experience left you with?
Well, I've never been to a war zone before. Don't know about you, Mandy, but I certainly haven't. So it was an experience. It was an experience to understand how people operate under these very difficult circumstances. How we saw plenty of ruined buildings and despondent people who blamed all kinds of parties to this conflict for what happened to them, and were obviously very traumatized by the whole experience. And equally, we saw some people who were doing an amazing job under the most extreme circumstances. So this combination of human suffering and human resilience was something that struck me.
Yeah, I think it's quite a surreal experience. Everyone keeps saying to me, I bet you were really upset, or were you crying when you were there? And it's kind of not really how we kind of experienced it. Oh, I didn't experience, we both didn't experience that, I don't think. But I think we met a lot of people that were very passionate about the country and that kind of dedicated their life to try and support the children. So I think that was a bit of a privilege to meet these kind of...
Yes, there was certainly, I think, a shortage of blue and yellow paint in Ukraine.
There was. And it made me think, I wondered if something happened in this country, would people be able to pull together in the same way? Because I think they said like something 70% of people volunteer in some way, by whether that's kind of cooking or sending something or driving or, just to support that area. And kind of like think how the community in some ways came together. We met some really, a surgeon that was going to the front line, and it was all a bit surreal really, and kind of soldiers at 1 minute, and it was all, it's not how I imagined it to be. There were bits of it where life just seemed to go on completely normal. We'd be driving through the war zone and see children playing outside, and then a few feet up you'd be seeing tanks and walls bashed down and bridges blown out, and so it was kind of like you were almost observing some TV programme that you weren't in. Sounds very strange, but it was a bit surreal.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.